Hi, this is Majo John Madden broadcasting from beside the swimming pool at the Hampton Inn in downtown Ciudad Victoria, Mexico. And nobody's swimming in the pool. Sometimes I've done videos from poolside because I go here because I can pull the Wi-Fi, and I'm not currently staying in the hotel, and they don't want my two dogs in the building. But I can get the Wi-Fi back here by the pool. I came up with a story here about the COVID that I think is a pretty interesting story. I was for 30 years wrongfully diagnosed as having mental illness, a bipolar disorder, which never was true and had a disastrous effect on my life for 30 years. But finally, even the top psychiatrist said, looks like they made a mistake 30 years ago. You were in a perfect storm of life crises, and how can you tell if somebody's got a mental illness when their life is in shambles the way it was in your early 40s? So, sorry. She didn't say sorry, but she said, I think they got it wrong 30 years ago. My fear was that because the big hospital, Asheville, North Carolina, where I was living, was a big medical center for all the mountains in western North Carolina. And the big hospital there, Mission Hospital, I had been a psych patient there several times. And I said several times to my primary doc, let's get something in the chart over there that says that I'm no longer a psych patient, because my worst fear is that I'll show up there sick for some reason and out of it, and they'll lock me up. They'll say it's a psych thing. And he says, I don't have privileges over there. There's no way I can get something in the file. So that happened. Exactly that happened. I had been punched by another homeless guy who was infamous for his fighting abilities, and he hit me with a sucker punch when I told him he had to get out of my van. And I had a terrible concussion. The guy who watched it said, that guy he's got an infamous punch, and he hit you smack in the face. Your nose looks crooked. I think you have a broken nose, and very possibly a concussion. And I actually never saw the punch, never felt it, never felt pain, but was kind of out of it. So I went down to the hospital, and this whole story is told elsewhere, but they did that. I told them I'm a little out of it, but I want you to rule out concussion or broken nose. And they put me on the psych ward, never tested me for concussion. And when my friends got me out of that psych ward, I still was a mess. And for about another 12 days or so, would have spells where I just got so weak I would fall down, get so weak I couldn't function. And in one of those cases, somebody sent an ambulance for me, and when the ambulance arrived, the issue was, well, what happens with my little dog Pancho, who was my dog then? And some kind lady pulled over and said, I'll take the dog. We exchanged our information. I think her name was Wendy. And she ended up having the dog for 24 or 48 hours, maybe longer than that. And when I got the dog back, she had fallen so in love with Pancho, who was, by that point, really a perfect dog. And she said that, she's a perfect dog. And she saw that I was kind of a sketchy character in her estimation, living out of a camper van and stuff. And she didn't want to give the dog back. And I had a real hard time making her give Pancho back, but she did. Well, some number of weeks later, on another visit to Asheville, Pancho and I were down at Pritchard Park. Now, Pritchard Park is a lovely little pocket park downtown, which classic to big tourist destinations. When the tourists are coming to town, they don't want homeless people. They won't allow homeless people to loiter in that park at all. But at the height of the COVID, there were no tourists coming, and that park was completely taken over by homeless people. and was a crazy scene. Was a crazy scene because a lot of them were using, and there would be people ranting and raving and people fighting and dog fights, and it was terrible. I aired. I don't. This was not a situation where I was spiritually high and wandered away from Pancho, but I guess I wasn't paying. I always err on the side of giving my dogs freedom and letting them be off leash, because I know that's so good for them. And Pancho wandered away from me, and I couldn't find her. So I thought, she's gone back to the apartment building where we used to live, because she would do that sometimes after we had moved out. She'd want to get back to her turf. So I wandered over there. No, she wasn't there. And then I had put, at Wendy's suggestion, I had put her name in addition to my name on Pancho's dog tag. So I got a call from Wendy, who had been called by somebody back down in Pritchard Park who had Pancho. And so I had Wendy on the line on the phone as I'm wandering back down to Pritchard Park to get Pancho back. And Wendy, who was a solidly middle-class person who had a lot of judgments about me, is going, how did you let your dog get away from you? And she's like screaming at me about being an irresponsible dog owner. So I finally just hung up on her. Got down to Pritchard Park, and it was a pretty combative, crazy woman who had Pancho and did not want to give Pancho back to me. She called the cops on me. The cops showed up, and the cop sized the situation up and knew she was cracked. And they were battling. The woman was battling with the cop about not wanting to give the dog back to me. I moved 100 yards away and sat down. And in the middle of their battle, Pancho slipped away from them. They just weren't paying attention to the dog. And Pancho ran back to me, and I got my Pancho back. What a glimpse that is of the COVID and of a tourist town like Asheville and the way people operate. But all's well that ended well. Pancho and I think we could still hear that woman screaming at the cop as we left Pritchard Park and went back and got our car and went about our lives. Okay.